Hello everyone, I'm here today to do my wrap-up for the Warwick prize for 2018. So if you don't know, I have this project in 2025 in which I'm reading through the long list of the Warwick Prize for Women in Translation, and this time is 2018, which was the second year of and there were 15 books in that list. I haven't read one of them, which is Bank by Dorrit Willumsen. It was just too difficult for me to get hold of, unfortunately. So I just skipped that one, but I have read everything else in the list, and I'm going to go through the list from the one that I like the least to the one I like the most. Before we go into that, I did give ratings to this, and keep in mind my ratings are normally lower than the average person. I think my average book is a 2.5. So the long list had an average of 2.98, the short list had an average of 3.04, so a little bit higher, and the winner was a 2.25, which is actually my lowest rated book of all the books that I have read. I didn't like that winner. But yeah, so this was maybe not the most successful of lists, but I do have a couple of books that I really enjoyed in this list, and I'm actually surprised that they didn't win. So the first book I'm going to talk about is Belladonna by Daša Drndić, and as I said, this was the winner. Yeah, it happens sometimes. But this is about Andreas Ban, which is a writer and a psychologist and are supposed to be this intellectual person. But he, as if I remember correctly, he had cancer, and he has like very little money. He has a pension that doesn't give him much. And when he gets the diagnostics of him having cancer, he changes his perspective a lot, and he decides to go around to historical things and places that he feels a connection to, sort of. And he talks about these things in the book, and there's photos and everything. And he goes to some through some bad history in Europe. As we know, the 20th century in Europe was not a peaceful time, and so he talks about the treatment of Jews and the Nazis and things like that, and yeah, what that did to people. And I thought there was some interesting reflections on the atrocities of the 20th century in Europe and what happened with Nazis, but it was very experimental. It was too experimental for me. It was fragmented. There was not a clear story, a clear picture, a clear message, and it just felt like random thoughts of a person, which is not my favorite type of read. I didn't enjoy it very much. Next one is Hair Everywhere by Tulić. And this is about a woman that her mother gets cancer, and we follow kind of like the grandmother mother-daughter kind of relationship. A lot of cancer in this list, but yeah, also it's about how the family roles change and how some responsibilities shifted to the daughter and stuff like that, and the feelings about death. For some reason, maybe it's the cover, but I thought this was going to be like younger, like the protagonist, the daughter, was gonna be like 13, 14, 15. No, it was a full adult. Like the daughter is a full adult in this book, and it was just not that interesting. She was a little bit of not a very nice person, and it was just not like very relatable in any way. And yeah, it was also written in a very vignette-like style, which again is not my thing. It just, yeah, I don't think it made very impactful statements or anything that I haven't read before done better, so that's why I was not very impressed by the book. The next one in the list is River by Starkinski. And this is basically about a woman that moves to London and her musings on River Lea, which I think it's in the suburbs or something. It's basically her thinking about rivers and kind of like thinking back on her life and what she has done and the things she's learned and all the things like that. Yeah, it was again. There was nothing. The writing was very good, and it felt like it was mainly done for the writing, but the story and the characters and all of that, it just didn't have any impact in me. And I think it's because it had this very choppy nature to it, so I just didn't feel connected to it in any way. And I think it's a lot of, we are seeing a lot of these vignette style things in this list, and most of them, there are a few exceptions and we will see that as well, but most of them just don't work for me. And yeah, I think that's also why the ratings of these books are so low. The next book, again, it's one of short stories, so very choppy nature to it, and it's Letty Park by Judith Herman. And this was short stories of different people, strangers. Letty Park is a park in Berlin, and we just follow people that go there, basically. It was mostly about everyday relationships, nothing particularly notable happens in any of these stories, and they're just very forgettable for me. I did not hate them when I was reading them or anything like that, but I just don't remember anything about them anymore. The next book is Of Dogs and Wolves by Yuko Tsushima, which is a collection of 2 short stories. It's like one of those Penguin classic 50-page kind of books. Yeah, this book follows mostly thoughts of the author or about memories and dreams and different things. I do like how Yuko Tsushima writes. I have read other books by her, so I think it's very well written, and it has this very like detached, magical, whimsy feel to those stories. I like the atmosphere, I like the quirkiness. I like these stories, again, nothing particularly impactful. I don't think short things in general impact me that much, but these ones were enjoyable to read at least. The next one is Burnout Subtext 1 by Virgin Despentes, and this is about a man that owns a very famous music shop in Paris, and he's kind of like a legend of the music scene at that point, but he is in a very tricky position. All his money and all his savings are gone, and then the book starts when his friend, who was paying all the rent and handling things, is dead, and we follow Vernon, which is the main character, like trying to survive basically in the streets of Paris, trying to survive. They go to Barcelona at some point as well. He, like, what he's trying to do mostly is, like, he has this film of this very famous filmmaker, and so everyone is kind of following him to try to get this film that he has, and he's trying to get away, and he's trying to still like survive, live his life, kind of thing. And it is supposed to be like a caricature of France. For some reason that description sounded to me like it was going to be the 80s, but it's not. It's like 2000s, I don't know. They have Facebook and they have like internet and stuff, so it's more recent than I thought it was gonna be, because that music scene kind of thing just sounds like the 80s to me. I did not love the writing style. I found it was trying to be offensive on purpose. It was trying to be shocking, and it was trying to be subversive, but it was just so obvious that it was doing that. It was trying to do that with the way that the story was told and the way that the language was used. I never liked those kind of books, to be honest. I find them like very shallow on the way on what they are trying to do, and maybe it's because I'm also not on the like music or art scene in any way. I don't enjoy stories of these like torture artists kind of thing. And this was a little bit like that. So yeah, it was not my kind of book. Then the next book was The House with the Stained Glass Windows by Sana Solonwiska. Probably butchered that, I'm sorry. But yeah, this was about 4 generations of women living in a house in Lviv in the 20th century. And there is the great grandma, which is like a tyrant, typical like, no, you do what I say and that's the end of it. And then there is the grandma, which is the daughter of that woman who wanted to be an artist, but she was not let to do that because the mother was such a tyrant. And then the mother of the story is an opera star, so she did manage to get her art form into a job, and she was fairly happy, but she was shot during the Ukrainian independence movement, and so she's out of the picture, but we do have the memories of her through the other characters. And then of course the daughter, who is a young woman and is very affected by the fact that her mom died and now she has to live with her grandma and great grandma. It was engaging. I think it was not a bad book, but I did think that for me particularly, and that's on me, that's not in the book, but for me to enjoy it as much as I could have, I think I needed more context on the region and what happened and all of these wars and yeah, the general context of the book to be able to really appreciate what it was trying to do. But I thought the story was fine. Next book in this list is 1947 by Elisabeth Åsbrink, and again this one is very vignette-like. So it is divided into the 12 months of 1947, and it goes through each month telling you the main things that happened in the world at that time. And of course 1947 was very historically relevant year, and it focuses a lot on war, the creation of Israel, the post-war situations, but also it talks a little bit about certain literary figures like Orwell or Simone de Beauvoir or Thomas Mann, and it like follows what they were doing at those times during 1947. And it was very interesting to see how all of these different things are connected. Like, I never realized that Israel was created so close to the end of the Second World War, or that is exactly when, I don't know, George Orwell was writing, and what relation was the creation of Israel having on his writing, for example. Just things like that. It gives a very holistic view on that year and the different things that were happening at the same time. I found the exploration very interesting, but also obviously it's just a sort of like vignettes of each month of the year, so it doesn't have an ongoing narrative or a hook or anything. So I was finding it very easy to put down and not picking it up again. But other than that, I think once I was reading it, I found it very interesting, and I think it is a very interesting idea and concept to explore. Next one that I read was Land of Smoke by Sara Gallardo, and this is short stories about South America and colonialism, and they're funny and they're cynical. They are in the vein of Eduardo Galeano, if you have ever read that. It does remind also a little bit of like magical realism and stuff, but it is a very domestic focused book. It's not about the big things that happen, it's more about the everyday life of people, and I think that makes sense. I think that a lot of times people expect women to write about the domestic because that's the space that they have been led to live in. But it was well done, it was cynical. I really enjoyed the humor of it, and even though short stories are not my cup of tea, I think they were well done, and if any short story is going to work for me, these ones were the ones, I would say. The next one in the list is maybe Esther, which is written by Katia Petrovskaya, and this is sort of a memoir of a family in the 20th century again. They are Poles, but they are like in Russia, and how that went. We know that Russians were very keen on keeping Russians in Russia, and all the other nationalities that we know now were like kind of absorbed, and if people didn't want to be absorbed in the Russian culture, they were sometimes ostracized. And so this is what this book follows. Basically, it's a family of Poles in Russia in the 20th century and what happened to them. It's very honest and very raw. It's also very well written. Also, the family is Jewish, and we also see what happens with the Nazis and how Russia also reacted to the Jews. Yeah, it's very hard, but it is very honest, and I appreciated that it didn't feel like most of these kind of stories feel. Like most of them feel very emotional, manipulative, and this was just the actual things that happened to these people. There were photos, and there were some brightness on the community that they lived in, but also of course a lot of hardship. It also didn't go into depth into that. It's mostly about the family and how the family grew and the family reacted to all these things. But yeah, we focus a lot on the family, but at the same time not too much. Like there is no silly family stories that nobody cares about other than the people in the family or inside jokes or anything like that. It's not that kind of book. I just think that it was very well done and like very well balanced with all these different elements. So if you want to read something sort of World War II adjacent, that is not overly dramatic and overly done, I think this one is a good one to pick up. Then the next one in the list is The White Book by Han Gan. And this is a very strange book. I don't think there's many books that are like this. They are just fragments of thoughts about the color white. About white things, about whiteness. Yeah, it's very weird, very poetic, and sometimes it feels very deep, sometimes it feels like words that I don't understand. It's very, very experimental, obviously, as you could imagine by the concept of it. But I think it's one book that you have to read several times before you completely understand. So it's one of those books that I could appreciate more than I could, like, I don't know, enjoy. The next book in the list is Go Went Gone by Jenny Erpenbeck, and this is about an old man that is retired, and he, almost by accident, he starts working on this refugee shelter, and he starts actually seeing what refugees go through and what his life is compared to what their lives are. And there was a scene in particular in which he was having dinner with his friends and laughing and talking about these very shallow things, and he was thinking, my god, these people are now trying to survive in these horrible places that they put them in, like the refugee camps or the refugee buildings that they have here in Europe are not great. And I'm just here laughing with my friends about things that don't matter. And yeah, it was very, I think it was very well done. It was not one that I don't know how to express it. There was something missing to it for me, but I think it was a very well done book, and I think it was an interesting perspective to add to the talks about the refugee crisis and how that was handled and still is handled. and how especially like African refugees are also exposed to racism and all these things, and how, I mean, this could apply to a lot of things, but how there's this big world problems that we all know that are there and we all know are horrible, but we also sometimes just go back home and just want a warm blanket and a thoughtless TV program and nice dinner and enjoy that with friends and talk about nothing, even though we know all these horrible things are going on in the world. Yeah, so I like the story, I like the topics that it was looking at. Maybe it was not the most convincing story for me. There was something that I was missing. I still have troubles putting my finger on it, but I enjoyed it. Then the next one is The Emperor of Portugalia by Selma Lagerlöf, and this is a very cute book. It's about this man, Jan de Rokov, or something like that, and he becomes a dad almost by accident. He was never planning to be a dad, and then one day his wife comes home and she's like, I'm having this baby, and he's like, I don't want anything to do with this baby. And then when the baby is born, put on his arms, and he completely falls in love with that baby, and it's his little girl forever and ever. And when she grows up, they're like the closest of friends. They're always doing things together. They enjoy each other's company very much. And then at some point she leaves for work or university or something to the capital city, and he completely falls apart. He becomes this really funny character. He thinks he's an emperor. He goes around making laws for people and wearing crowns, and he's completely like loses his mind because his little girl left. And when she comes back and sees how he is, she's very embarrassed, and she wants to try cards with him, which throws him even more into this world of thoughts that he should never go into. And it was very cute to see this man that never wanted this kid to completely fall in love, but also it was very hard to see how his heart was broken, and it's one of those bittersweet stories, but I really enjoyed it. I think it was very nice. And the last one in this list, so my favorite book of this list was Flights by Olga Tokarczuk. It's no secret that I love Olga Tokarczuk, and this is probably my favorite book of all of them. It's not a book for everybody, but it is a book for me, and it is surprising that it's a book for me because it's also a very fragmented story. We've talked a lot about fragmented stories in this book, in this list. There are a lot of them. Apparently this year's judges were very into fragmented vignette-like stories, but Flights to me is the perfect book for that. And it basically explores things that move. So it talks about traveling, but it also talks about how the blood goes up and down on the body. It talks about death and the movement of death. It talks about planes and how they work. It talks about migration of people and how they move from one place to the other. It talks about all kinds of things that move in any way. They can move in circles, they can move from one place to another in different levels of farness. It talks a lot about lots of things, and it's very... Olga Tokarczuk is always a very cynic writer, which I really enjoy, and she interweaves all of these different thoughts with a story that keeps you hooked and keeps you going. And this the main character of the book is someone that never settles and goes from one place to another and explores things in time, in space, in everything. It's just very meta and it's very philosophical, but it's also very cynical and kind of funny, and I just really enjoyed it. So yeah, this is my favorite book of the list by far. Even though it's in vignettes, even though it's not cohesive, even though that's not normally the kind of thing I like, this was perfect for me. So yeah, that's my winner for this year. Even though the actual winner I really didn't like, that's fine. We all have our opinions. But yeah, those are all the books that were in the Warwick Prize for Women in Translation in 2018. Let me know if you have read any of them, what your thoughts were about them, if you agree with me and Flight should have been the winner of this year's prize. And until next video, bye!